What you see here is a kit that I bought in a charity auction. It's a Tamiya model of a Freightliner Cascadia Evolution Tractor. I haven't done any of these in the past, but I thought it would be an interesting project to do with my son. To get the complete kit, you'll have to buy multiple components that you see here. It's a fairly complicated model, so it takes quite a long time to build. In fact, in this I did a time-lapse type video. So for each 1 minute you view here is in real time 1 hour. So I'll go ahead and start it here, and then I'll provide some commentary on different steps in the process. So started the kit, pretty complicated. So opened the box, sorted through the many parts, reviewed the instructions, trying to figure out what's what. The first step was to start with the control solenoids. So this is a fully functional radio-controlled vehicle, and it has control solenoids for the shifting and the steering mechanism. So I'm not sure exactly which ones these are, so there's several sets for turning and shifting. So right now we're working on those solenoid assemblies and getting those mounted or put onto the brackets and the proper alignment for the output of those. So this is attaching them to the bracket so that we can install them into the chassis onto the next step. Okay, we're working on the cross members. I think this is the front section that's going to go in between the rails. So we're assembling these, getting them ready. Lots of small screws and fasteners. Takes a while to figure out. They're kind of in bags, sorted somewhat, but you you have to really figure out which is which. So here you can see the frame rails for the vehicle and putting in the cross members on it. The actual frame rails are metal. Most of the other parts are plastic. So securing down all the cross members on there and getting the front solenoids in there. And that was the first section that we did. So already 2 hours into the project. And these are some support brackets that are going on for the front suspension and axles. Then you even assemble some of the shock absorbers and struts that go in for the steering. A lot of parts are built up from the ground up in here, so it's a pretty good project to see how everything goes together. Try to tidy up the wiring a little bit. Putting on the brackets that'll hold the suspension springs. Definitely helps to have a good set of screwdrivers and smaller tools for the process. We use some calipers just to measure out the parts to check them with the list that's on the instructions. They give you a few things like the little wrench there to help you. So this is the actual springs for this front suspension, getting those assembled and put into place, secure them down. definitely some parts are, some areas of the vehicle are good to do together, a little bit tricky. You can see we're getting out some new part supplies from the bags and trying to sort through those, figure out which ones actually we need for the next step. Can be a time consuming. It's a little bit like a puzzle. That's part of the fun. So we're working on the rear suspension there. About 5 hours into the project. Now we're working on, I think this is the actual gearbox for it. This is, I think, the rear axle. Yep. So you can see even within the rear axle, you have to assemble the axle and the gears and where the drive line will go into them. Use a little bit of the Loctite type thing to keep the screws secured. So you have to follow that on the instructions. Then they also have some grease to put in the actual the gears where they go together. Get that secured. Final assembly, and we had the two for the rear part. It's actually a dual drive in the back. It does actually have different speeds, so there's actually a gearbox or a shifting box that we'll assemble later on. So just getting that secured into place, making sure everything's set up, tightened down. Put some more shocks into place, keep everything in the right place, stabilized. So now 7 hours into the project. Yeah, now we're assembling the shifting box for it. So it's kind of like a little bit of a transmission. So this one took a little bit of a while to figure out what was going on. It was a little bit of a challenge following the instructions. We didn't want to do it incorrectly, so we definitely wanted to play around with it and try to figure out how it was going to work in the end to make sure that we were putting it together correctly. You saw some glue there. For most parts of the kit, there's not many parts that glue together, especially on the main chassis. Most of it is screwed together, as you can see. Still working on the shifter box. I wonder what the total amount of time we worked on it. I didn't look at that, but I remember we spent quite a bit of time working on this, going through it and checking everything out. There's the electric drive motor. They'll hook up into that. So finally finished that step. There's some decals and stuff that go at various spots. Getting the motor, transmission, driveline assembly into position. So now we're going to start working on the wheels and tires. So a little bit of a trick to get those on. They said that they were pretty tight. Instructions said to glue them down, so we did. Don't know if it's completely necessary. We just put a little bit in there to try to make sure that they were secure. You can see lots of tires, just like a real full-size Class 8 vehicle. Some dualies. Starting to look like a real truck now with the tires, frame rail all assembled. Start to visualize how it will be. Now working on the simulated fuel tanks, which hold some of the electronic controls for turning it on and off and doing some other settings on the vehicle, like the lighting and some of the modes. So this was a little bit confusing because it gave you a lot of different fuel tank configurations, which are actually for different kits. I'm not sure why they supplied them all with the kit, so I had to sort through and try to figure out which ones were the correct ones. Finally got it figured out, getting it assembled and mounted up. Starting to work on some of the electronics now. That's the electronics I was talking about for the control panel. It goes underneath one of the tanks. You don't really see it unless you lift it up and turn it over. It's the fifth wheel step plate with a fifth wheel mechanism on it. I didn't get the automated fifth wheel assembly electronic. They have that available. So now we're first attempt at painting. This is the rear closing cross member. Don't think we did a very good job on it, but on the paint, but it worked out okay. We needed to thin the paint down, that's what we figured out, so we started doing that later. So some lighting, this is where we started putting in. It has LED lighting, so for the tail lights, backup lights, turn signals, they have actual LED lighting, so figuring that out, making sure we get it assembled in there. Lots of different lighting, so you got, just like everything else, got to figure out which one's the correct one. Put it in there. The mud flaps you see sitting there, so those will come in later. There's these little screws that go into the plastic parts. That's the worst part about the whole kit. Those screws do not want to go into the plastic. We tried different screws. We actually ended up drilling out the hole a little bit, and then we got them too big, and then so we just glued them in after that. Not much you can do, but there's some other ones later on with different parts of the vehicle, and it's the same problem. It's just certain one screw just into the plastic. It was super difficult. You couldn't put enough pressure on it and it would just kind of strip out the head. So that was kind of the worst part about the kit. So there's the mud flap assemblies for the rear, putting on I think the trying to figure out where to put the decals on there and get them set up in the correct spots. Put on the license plate on the rear, get that glued on. Now working on the trailer fifth wheel mount. This one also had a lot of different variations in the kit, but you only need one of them, of course. So seemingly it would be a simple assembly for the fifth wheel, but as you can see, just there's lots of parts involved even in that. Finally got the fifth wheel assembled, putting on the mud flaps onto the rear closing cross member that will mount up. And finally getting the whole assembly mounted to the frame rails along with the fifth wheel mount. 16.5 hours into the project now. Now we're starting to get to the cab components. So we're going to have to start getting into the painting steps. Again, not really much experience. I think we did an okay job on that. Just trying to sand it out per the instructions. Not sure how much it helps, but just kind of roughing up the surface to get it ready for painting. You can kind of see how the parts are and for the cab. So finally getting to some painting steps. We did use some primer on it. So this is just the primer coat. Didn't really have any experience doing models spray painting or other spray painting, so we did take our time. Definitely, I'm sure we could have done a lot better on it, but again, I think the results were okay. So this is still the primer paint on here, just again doing some rough or a little bit of sanding on it. Get them ready for the top coat. Now we're going to work on the interior seats, trying to get some leather like brown color. Trying to mix the paints to see what we can come up with. Those are the hand rests for the seats. It's a little tricky. Front bumper there. And the side fairings. Still working on the seats now. Another coat of paint. get all the parts cut off and kind of trim them up to get rid of the rough spots, masking out where the different colors are going to be on the side fairings, the deck of the cab assembly. These parts we did have some finish, the silver paint on it. I don't think it was shown on the time lapse, so there's a little bit of painting we did on those. Side fairings and side extenders, the main colors, the silver, the part that's being masked off is the black for the rubber part that's on there on an actual vehicle. So I spent a little bit of time masking it off. I think it worked out pretty well, even though it takes a little bit of time. It works out okay. You just bought a cheap roll of masking brown paper and down at Home Depot, and you can get it really cheap, so I recommend that. So we went through lots of paint, had to go buy more, so you definitely need lots of paint because we did a lot of coats on it and still probably wasn't quite enough. Just like any paint job, you really need a clean environment. It wasn't super clean in there, so like any dust or hair gets picked up on it. So could have definitely done better on that. That's where the battery for the vehicle goes, that compartment. So getting that set up with the retainer clips to keep it in place. These little side trim pieces were a pain because it had those hard screws to put in. So I had to get the drill out again, try to get those in. We ended up using pliers trying to twist the screws in too. Still working on getting those screws in. The wiring definitely turns into a rat's nest, so that's takes a little bit of time too. Gets worse when you get to the cab, but trying to tidy up the wiring and make it as nice as possible, keep it out of the drive line in the mechanisms, secure it up good. Trying to make sure all the wiring is going to reach, and test assemble it to see if it's all going to reach and fit together good. "25 hours into it now. Definitely not a quick project. That's where we decided to do some more coats to it, get some more paint. I didn't do a top coat over top, so just did the standard paint color over the primer. So I'm not sure, it could be like a glossier finish if you did like some kind of top coat over it. This is an interesting thing. This is a little offset thing that spins that actually causes the model to shake like a real vehicle when the motor is running. So it gives it a little extra wobble, just like a real vehicle would do. So it is controlled by the controller as far as when you're driving it. You'll see in a little bit too that it has, and you probably saw it in the pictures, that there's a speaker also that gives some truck sounds like the motor running, and a horn, so it gives it a more realistic feel. There's plenty of length on the wiring, but it was a little challenging. Finally actually got it working there, tested it out, and as you could see, it was moving around and things seemed to be functioning okay. Here you see the masking paper that we're using. So again, a little bit of a tedious process, but it's all part of the fun, I guess, of assembling it. Front bumper assembly again. The other part for the side extenders. The main cab assembly with the front grille. So we got the black paint on. Didn't show that in the time lapse. Didn't take too long to do that though. Those handles on the chairs were a little bit on the seats were a little bit difficult to get glued on, a little bit fragile. They're only connected in one little spot. Hand painting around the windows for the kind of the black gasket around that in the front windshield. Working on the front headlight assemblies. Some more of those terrible screws to put in. That's the one thing I would say that they should really improve, unless I'm just completely missing a trick to putting those in. That was the worst part. Those are the seat mounts on the cab there, trying to glue the seats down to them. Had to kind of scrape off some of the paint to get a good plastic bond on them. My son giving a go at trying to get those screws in. Getting the lights installed along with the front grille into the cab assembly. So you can see a few things glue in. Some trim pieces, I think that's the door handle there, glues in. Those side extenders don't look too bad, so you can see how the black part looks like the rubber extension on those. Even though it's all one big plastic piece. Starting to look like a real cab at this point. Working on the mirrors, those were also a little bit tricky. Didn't turn out as good as I'd like. Got a little bit of glue on the mirror part of it and some of the back parts, so that's something to be kind of careful of. Getting the plastic pieces in for the windows. Paint some of them in the back to give them kind of a tinted look to the glass. Worked out okay. I don't know if I did it right, but it seemed to work out okay. They look really dark in the time lapse here, but when they're actually installed, they look like tinted glass. See the cat getting in the way, wanting to play. So working on the overhead marker light assembly. Those are the lights that go on the top of the cab above the windshield. So you can see they're functional also with LED lighting and lots more wiring to deal with. It does get to be a little bit difficult to deal with all the wiring and make it look nice. Now you get a good feel for the cab with the roof cap on it. So now this is that speaker I was talking about, the speaker assembly. So that actually goes in the upper roof cap. Got that in place now. Mounting the mirrors on the outside. I think I had to re-glue those on because, of course, with them sticking out like that, they're a little bit fragile. There's a good shot of the cab. Still working on those lighting up above. You can see how they stick through the upper cap. More decals, working on the steering wheel and the dash. They have the decals on it to give it like the switches and gauges that go on that radio. Clips for mounting the dash into the cab. Then these are the lower side fairings. I'm going to get those mounted up with the cab. This is assembling though the step plates, tread plates that are on the entry plate, and then the front bumper trims. The chrome piece on that. Front license plate. A little bit more tinted glass again for the front fog lights. This is the back wall assembly that actually on this vehicle actually comes off because that's how you access the battery and some of the wiring if you need to work on it. Those are the little latch mechanisms so that it'll lock into place when you get it in. Some grab handles going on the back. the license plate on. Another cat come to visit. Finally getting the bumper assembly mounted to the frame, front frame assembly. Looks like I had to take it off though. Probably had a clearance problem trying to figure out how to get that cab on. Here's where you can kind of see a little bit of the wiring mess. This was definitely tricky getting the wiring, because you have to get the cab into place and then plug it in, all the little connectors to the control module in the right spot. Then you don't have much space to work with, and then you have to mount the cab on there. So that part was a little bit difficult, challenging to do. I mean, they give you plenty of wiring so that you can work on it, but if they give you much more, it would be really hard to stuff all the wiring back into the cab. Alright, I think I finally got that cab mounted. Doing some final adjustments, get that back wall on, getting the side fairings, doing some gluing on the windshield wipers, trying out the vehicle. As you can see, it was working. So that's the final assembly. 42 hours, 13 minutes, plus whatever else I didn't record, so it was actually a little bit longer because I didn't capture all the painting. I guess next up would be a trailer for the truck, which I actually have the trailer kit, but we haven't worked on it yet.
Yeah, you might want that.
That in here for outside.